Well, I could start by talking about how I met Elmore Leonard, and I think it was 1987, and my fiction editor at the time, Peter Gathers, said, "Listen, Esquire wants you to write a piece," and I said, "Listen, I have enough to do. I'm writing 4 columns a week. I'm writing books now. I have enough to do." And they said, "No, because you've written some mysteries, they'd like you to write a profile of Elmore Leonard," and I said, "I'll do it." And I still didn't really have any. The funny thing about it is, it touched off 10 years of writing the sports column for Esquire, but I still didn't really have any driving interest to write this piece. I just wanted to meet him and hang out with him. So I flew to Detroit and drove up to Birmingham, and he was married to Joan at the time, and we just instantly hit it off. And I knew he was a big Tigers fan, and I said, "Let's go to a Tigers game." So I got us good seats behind the third base dugout at the Tiger Stadium. And I've got another funny story about Tiger Stadium later. And he gets recognized. It's in the piece. He gets recognized by a vendor. And by then he'd been on the cover of Newsweek, and he was, he was starting to become what he became. But the guy recognized him. And I forget what book it is. I'd have to go back and look at the piece. And he said, "No, I bought your book the other day for $5." And the guy walks away, and Dutch goes, "Oh, what the hell? That's the remainder bin." And so and then later on, on another visit to Detroit, because whenever I'd have a book tour, when I started writing kids' books, I'd make them give me a Detroit stop just so I could go hang out with Dutch. And, I knew how much he loved Ernie Harwell, and I knew how much he loved the Tigers. And I was friends with Ernie Harwell, and I told him I was bringing Elmore Leonard, and he knew who he was. And so there that day, behind the batting cage, during batting practice, is Dutch chopping it up with Ernie Harwell, icon on icon. And we're driving home later, and he said, "I've been a fan of this team for about 200 years, and it took a sports writer from New York to get me down on that field." And so that was extremely meaningful to him. We just we had an awful lot of fun. One night when I started writing the sports column for Esquire, I was going down to Pete Rose's joint. We're both in Florida. We had places in Florida maybe 10 minutes apart. And we were playing tennis against each other and having a blast and going out to dinner. And I'm going down to Pete Rose's to meet Reggie Jackson and Pete Rose for this piece I'm working on. And at the last second, I called him up and I said, "What are you doing?" He goes, "Nothing." I said, "Here's where I'm going. Do you want to go?" He goes, "Yeah." So we go down just because I knew here's a guy who built this amazing, extraordinary career on scenes. And I said, "Whatever happens tonight, this is going to be a great scene." And so he was his laid back self. And Reggie, God bless him, had no idea who he was. He had heard me call him Dutch. And at one point he turned to me and he said, "So Dutchman, what kind of, are you one of those fiction writers, nonfiction writers?" And at one point, at the end of the night, Reggie turned to him and he said, "Dutchman, you got a business card?" And Dutch looked at him and he said, "I don't even have an answering machine." And just that made the trip down to Boca from North Palm Beach worth it. He used to describe my tennis game this way. I'd lob him, of course, because I didn't care how old he was. I'm just trying to win the point, is this. Because that meant he heard in my little feet coming to the net. And one day I came back, we'd played 2 sets, and Taylor, my wife, who loved Dutch, said, "Who won?" I said, "I did, 6-1, 6-2. And Taylor said, "Dutch is 72 years old." And I said, "Hey, a win's a win." And he knew, but I love playing with him because his tennis game was exactly as you would imagine it to be. It was touch and feel and spin and imagination, and he was like a little kid. And I don't think he smoked while he played, but Greg, I can't promise you that he didn't have a cigarette in his right hand while we were playing tennis. And it was a friendship that lasted from going to Birmingham for that piece literally until I got the call from you early that evening to tell me that he'd had the stroke. And I've in one line I wrote about him that I think you've seen is the only thing better than reading Elmore Leonard is rereading him. And then when he died, I wrote a piece. I said the only thing better than reading Elmore Leonard was knowing him. And well, you know this better than I. We had been on the phone late that afternoon, and he had finally decided to put Raylan into Blue Dreams, the novel he was working on. And all of a sudden, it became 100 other conversations we'd had where here I've got at the other end of the line, Elmore Leonard reading me from literally what he had written that day. And he was as excited as a little kid because he knew he had it, that all of a sudden, Raylan being in the book opened up the possibilities. At one point he said, well, if I put Raylan in the book, somebody else owns the character. And I said, Dutch, you're 87 years old. Who gives a shit who owns the character? You just write your book and make it what you've always done, which is the best book you can write. And, a few hours later, I found out what had happened. And, the next time we saw each other was that weekend at the funeral, which this because you were there. And what was that? 21. What was the number of that restaurant that he liked that he used to go to?
220.
Huh?
220.
Yeah, and we went with all the Justine and Graham and Tim Oliphant, and we all went there that night, and nobody was sad. It became this great celebration of knowing him. If you can look over my shoulder, this picture. It's him, hands on hips. I don't know if you can see it. Wait.
Well, I was going to ask you about that picture.
T-shirt. Okay,
yes.
That's the famous T-shirt because when he was going through the divorce, he was bitching constantly. Somebody always wanted to do this and to talk to him about this. So I had these T-shirts made up that said, "Not now, I'm writing." And I said, if anybody bothers you from now on, you just have that T-shirt on, and when they come up to you, you just point to it, and they'll understand that you don't want to be bothered. And that, actually, Greg, that T-shirt ended up costing me about $500 because everybody in the Justified writing room wanted one, and I think I had to get you one too.
No, I have one.
And I wore it underneath my dress shirt at the funeral that day. You and I did the readings that day, and I forget one of the guys covering the thing. I opened my shirt later and showed him the T-shirt. And as you recall, when I forget what the reading was that day. But I turned to the priest and I said, just so you understand, I'm going to leave out the parts today that readers tend to skip. And that actually got a pretty big laugh at the church. I used to call him. I'd wait until late in the afternoon to call him because I knew that my writing day never lasted as long as his writing day. And I just couldn't sit there as long as he could. But I think I've told you this story, and I told him this story. There'd be days when I thought I was done writing. And we did the same thing. I write on blank yellow pages because of him. I used to be on legal pads. He said, why do you have to worry about lines? And even that made writing easier. But I think I'd be done for the day. And then I think to myself, there's this 80-something dude out in Michigan, and if he can still be going at this time of day, I can still be going at this time of day. And then I finally call him like 4 or 4:30 when I was pretty sure he was winding down. And I'd always begin the conversation the same way. Are you writing or thinking of girls? And every day he'd get what he'd say, what, you can't do both? And that was the tone and the nature of our relationship, which was just for me, a beautiful and perfect friendship, Greg, except if I had to be the passenger in a car that he was driving, because I don't know what the 5 scariest things. You know this. No, did he let you drive, or did you have to let him drive?
I've been in the car when he has been the driver, but most of the time I drive. Yeah. On our research trips.
Yeah, so first of all, the speed limit had no meaning for him, and he apparently thought that curbs were just suggestions. So, like, I'd be in Detroit for a Super Bowl or something, and we'd I'd say, I can drive out. And he'd say, no, I'll come in and pick you up at your hotel in downtown Detroit. And I go, no, 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 that's okay. But he'd say, no, I'm coming. And it would be, he'd turn that VW into a Death Star until we were safely in the driveway at home.
And then at he got that new Volkswagen, and he would always be he'd be going to Peter's for dinner and stuff, and everybody would always worry about that 1 mile or so that he had to drive to
No,
get.
no, because see what I found was it didn't matter how short the journey was. It was perilous whether it was 20 miles or 5 miles or 1 mile. I always thought his head was just full of stories at all times, and he just wasn't quite as focused on his driving as I would have liked my friend to be. But I go to the house sometimes, and it'd be lunchtime, and he'd say, "You hungry?" And I'd say, "Yeah, I can eat." He'd go to the cupboard and he'd pull out a bag of stale popcorn, like the bag you buy at the store. He'd open it up and toss it on the counter, and he'd say, "Here, go ahead." I'd say, "Oh, thank you, Dutch. Thank you so much."
See, your relationship with him was totally unique. I mean, you made him you allowed him to be just that cool friend, or just to relax. He
And
wasn't.
even goofy, he was not afraid to be goofy with me.
And talk about some of those like fabulous like dinners in New York, or with your buddies, like William Goldman, and and so forth. Just in and talk a little bit about Julie,
Oh,
maybe.
well, we had more than one, because Bill loved his work, and then once I put them together, they were instantly friends, and it was after Joan had died, because as you know, that was just such a hideous time because they were supposed to live happily ever after, and my wife Taylor and Joan they're both smart, wonderful Midwestern blondes, and they hit it off immediately. So we had such nice times with them. But then Taylor and I would bring Bill, and we would have fabulous meals. And then I wish I could remember the cast of characters. The famous dinner at the Post House. What I think was it for the Peabody? He was in town to get.
It was the Peabody.
Yeah. And so Graham was there. I was there. Bill was there. There was other people there that night, and we had
Julie was there.
Well, yeah, maybe she was, and we had a big table at the Post House, which was Bill Goldman's favorite New York steakhouse on 63rd between Park and Madison. It's gone now, but we were both regulars there. We had a big table that Bill and I had before, and it was just a great night of storytelling. But the best part of it was Bill and Dutch putting their heads together. And I mean, so here you've got Dutch with his body of work, and Bill with Butch Cassidy and the screenplay for All the President's Men and Marathon Man and Princess Bride and his extraordinary career. And they were like a couple of old ball players talking about baseball. I mean, it was inside writing, but to my ear, it was like inside. And Butch would say, "Well, in a Marathon Man with the car chase at the beginning, and the way you pulled that together," and Bill would say, "Yeah, but how about the last line of Get Short?" And I'm paraphrasing here. "Endings, man, they're harder than you think." And it was one of those, as Bill said in his Bill Goldman voice the next day, "It was magical." But you know what? It really was. And yeah, his trips we always had fun when he came to New York. And I'd pick him up. He'd stay at the Omni Berkshire place. And if I got there a few minutes late, I knew where to find him, leaning against the wall, smoking, near the corner of Madison Avenue. And he and and we sometimes if I got there early, I'd pick him up in the room. And no smoking rooms and smoking rooms were not, as you know, Greg, he didn't differentiate. And if
He paid a lot of fines, a lot of fines.
yeah, and if there wasn't an ashtray in the room because it was a no smoking room, he just used a soap dish.
Yeah, that love affair with cigarettes, and people could bond with him if they, like I remember at the Peabody, like he going out with Graham and having a smoke, and it was like, that's a bonding experience with him. But I never, smoked with him.
I had quit smoking a few years before, and it was desperately difficult to do with the time and then remember on the writing table in the living room in Birmingham,
Yep.
he, he had that little smoke sucking machine that he really believed gave his visitors superpowers against secondary smoke, and I didn't have the heart to tell him it didn't really work that way.
So when I mentioned Julia, I was wrong. I was thinking of the wrong event because don't
No,
forget
no,
there was
she wasn't at the
no, no,
post
no,
house.
no. But it's the National Book Award.
Yeah, no, that was different because we
Yeah,
met
and
up in her apartment.
her Pedicure on Horatio Street it was,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
uh, and then we had another dinner after that, right? Or you was there another dinner with Bill after that?
There might have been. I would say that probably over the years we had half a dozen. Because if Bill knew Dutch was coming to town, he wanted me to set up something because again, there was an instant camaraderie between the two of them. Bill lived in, Bill died in November of, I think, 6 years ago. He would have been, let's see, he was born in 1931. So he was in his late 80s too. So they both ran the whole race, the two of them. It was great.
Yeah. Uh, was there? Correct me if I'm wrong, but was there a connection with Pete Hamill and Dutch?
Well, Pete, I think Pete and I got together with Dutch one time in New York because Pete had in the long ago written a terrific piece about Dutch for when we still had the New York Daily News Sunday magazine, and it was fabulous. And Pete got everything that was great about Dutch's writing. And he was ahead of the Newsweek cover. I mean, yeah. Pete was a huge fan of uh, Dutch. Yeah.
Did you, as a writer? I mean, a lot of times when when I speak to writers, like Jim Hall, for example, I mean the influence that Dutch had on their writing. But you were well established, in all different fields of writing, fiction and of course journalism. But what did you were there takeaways for you?
Yeah, dialogue. No, no. The thing that was burned into my memory is nobody ever skips dialogue. It was, um, I, I've never not used said as an active verb. It's never said someone. It's he said, she said. And as you know, his dream page was the most possible white space. I think he did. I can't remember. You might remember it. Wasn't there his dream page in one book where it was exclusively one line of dialogue all the way down the page? And to him, that was like the most beautiful. There's this play. Taylor and I went to see the play Art with Neil Patrick Harris and Bobby Cannavale and James Corden the other night. And I don't know if you know the play, but it's about these three friends, and one of them pays $300,000 for a blank white canvas that he has told is a major work of art. And all I was thinking of the other night, I said, "Oh my God, if Dutch could have had a blank page, that would have been like his dream page."
Yeah, you're right. And I'm going to look that up. I'm going to find that page, but I recall that page that was so perfect because it was almost like a blizzard of white,
Yeah, it was like his
and it
whole. He
was
finally
bang,
found his
bang,
holy.
bang.
It was his holy grail. He finally found the holy grail. And as you know, it became a saga. But one of the great honors and something he did when he dedicated Djibouti to me. It was just one of the highlights of my. Yeah, I don't have it in this room. I have it in my writing room in Florida. But that was you could have knocked me down that day with a strong gust of wind. I was so thrilled that this guy, one of my writing heroes and my dear friend had given me that gift. It was pretty great.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of Djibouti, and speaking of the later books, I mean, did you feel like he was like struggling more in the last cent in the in the aughts because you know a lot of people think that Tishomingo Blues was really, his last great novel. But I
Oh
mean,
no, I once Raylan was Raylan just got him running downhill again. Okay, Raylan and Justified and that confluence of events. I remember we did a big event. I interviewed him. I mean, I did it a few times. One up in New Canaan at the library in front of a huge crowd, but we did an event at a Barnes and Noble
by the
in
way,
the
Mike, I have that up on my Substack.
that interview was the one at Barnes and Noble.
Yes.
Yeah, and again, I'm paraphrasing our conversation, but I made the suggestion. I think Raylan had debuted at 6 or 7 on the Times bestseller list, and so he's back. He's back on the Times list, and I might have said something. Either I said it or I was quoting somebody saying, "Well, you're back," and he almost snapped at me, and he said, "Where did I go?" So he never thought he had a slump in the late innings. Believe me.
No, but yeah, but I mean, but he would always say it never gets easier.
No, but no. I mean, we listen. I saw the pages when I would come to visit him. I saw the crossouts. I mean, Greg, hold on a second. This is stuff I'm working on right now with Jim Patterson, who, by the way, is now co-writing with Jim Bourne, who Dutch got into the game, helping out with stuff. But no, it was a painstaking process, and if he got a good page a day, he was happy. He told me that one time, and I said, "Well, as a newspaper columnist, Dutch, I didn't quite have that luxury. I had to produce a little bit more than one good page a day because they sort of insisted on it at the Daily News. But if he would sit there all day until he got it exactly right, and then when you read the book, you'd say, "Oh yeah, you got it exactly right again."
Well, what I mean, I think we got plenty here. But like, kind of as an outro, I mean, like his lasting influence or whatever, just something that will just, we can tack on the end of this.
He was the coolest guy in the room. He was the coolest guy in every room he was in. Whether we were in a restaurant, whether it was the two of us, whether we were sitting at the ballpark, whether he was behind the batting cage, he never tried too hard. And to me, his life was sort of like that the story I used to tell about Joan giving him a look when she thought he was overwriting. Dutch never overwrote in anything he did, and it was an immense part of the joy of knowing him, of being his friend. And I remember at the back of the church in the casket that day, I just leaned over and I said, "Pal, we had an awful lot of fun."
That's a good wrap up to the piece. But if you want to can we keep going for a few more minutes?
Sure, yeah.
So, well, Carol Ann, who was, as was his girlfriend at the end. Um, she told me that he would say to her that he had lost his sound that summer because I mean it had been, like such a gruel with the divorce, and then it was like, there was no time to write. It was going from like mediation to this to that, lawyer this, lawyer that. And he could never get into that writing, that wonderful rhythm of his that where he could crank out a book in 5 or 6 months.
Right.
And she said that what he would do that summer uh, is she would see him sitting by the pool, like reading The Hot Kid or reading one of his books, getting back
The
into
sound back into it. Yeah.
into that sound. And the combination of things, uh, of course, the key was bringing Raylan back in, but it was
Yeah.
also like we had developed a new location because he had been sort of fixated on Palm Springs, but we were moving the story down to Imperial County, which was much more of an interesting no man's land kind of place. And I was about to go on a big research trip, down there. Um, but you talked to him, and within minutes, I have the log of your conversation with him. I spoke to him, and we talked about my trip. We talked about, the all the, like, I don't know if he told you this, but I found this thing about there was this pot gun that shot pot across the border, and
Yeah.
and he just loved that. I just lost you for a second here. He just loved. I mean, it was like we were working again. I mean, he
Yeah.
at one point he said to me, "Everybody's trying to get me to write." I mean, it's just like I'm 80. It's sort of like you're 87. You're allowed to retire, but he could never retire. And then the previous year, he told the Wall Street Journal, they go, "Why do you write?" He goes, "What else am I going to do?"
What- It's like I asked him one time if he was walking. He'd say, "Yeah, I'd try it," but then I'd think, "Where am I going?" He just wanted to be back at his desk. And again, that day, it's such an important memory, that last conversation, because Greg was like every conversation we ever had. He was himself. He didn't sound like he was 87. It could have been any year that I knew him. And Taylor would come down. I had in our old house in Connecticut, I had a great riding cottage down the hill from our house. And she'd come down for something, and she'd know instantly that I was talking to Dutch. She said, "If I hear you laughing, I know that it's you and Dutch being silly." And it was always that time of the day. And so I couldn't tell you exactly when I spoke to him that day, but I would think it was 4:30 or 5 o'clock, and he's reading to me again, which was, to me, that was the whole ball. When he'd start doing that,
It
and
was such a treat, wasn't it?
oh God, he'd take on different attitudes, and it was, and I could picture him sitting there doing it, and then I don't know how many hours later you called me and told me that he'd had a stroke, and I just never thought he had a chance after that.
You just don't. I mean, for me, you just don't consider this mortality thing. I mean, we just went from one book to when are you going to do a new one? I would, when are you going to do a new one? And he had he kind of got into this whole thing with his with Julie became his muse, and that's something that he kind of like deviated in a way from I write to please myself to I write to describe this person, and it was really a
Yeah,
weird kind of thing, but uh but he would have untangled it all. He only got to page 85, that. I mean,
yeah.
and
Well, but
but
he
it's
was he was happy though, because he all of a sudden it's like the doors and the windows got open.
yeah.
Once you put Raylan in, and I'll tell you, when you talk about Carol, I forgot about Carol. But at the wake, when she came walking in, and she's wearing a red dress, and I don't remember who else was there, and who I was standing with. I might have been standing with you in the back, and I was about to go back to the hotel, and she kind of comes flouncing in, and I said, "You know what? I think I'm going to hang around." I think I might hang around for a little while and see what develops here. I think Christine was there. I don't know if she was or not, but it was
She,
pretty funny.
she might have snuck in, but I don't think she no, was not there prominently because of everything that had happened. But he would get that little catch in his voice, that little sound of excitement, of childlike
Yeah.
excitement. In Julie's video, and she does she wanted to take photos of Dutch, at working, and Dutch said, "Well, why don't you do a movie of me, how to write a book, which was totally ridiculous, but she shot about 25 hours of footage.
Oh my
And
God.
one of the scenes in his office, you remember his back office?
Yeah.
In his back office, you
Oh, you
had
mean
called.
the glory? I call it the glory room.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean it was yeah, you called, and and I should pull that full footage out and send it to you sometime. But I mean, it was just so, like he's talking to his best friend. I mean, it was just like that. He was like I mean, I wasn't jealous exactly, but I mean, it's just like the idea, like he would, I mean, you there are very, very few people in his life that I think that he could really just be totally free with, and revert to that childlike wonder that true friendship me
Well,
is.
I'm glad you saw it that way. It's the way I felt it, and the last years of his life, I persisted in calling him the hot kid. I said, "You're the hot kid. You're the hot kid. You're still a hot kid," and he kind of liked that.
Well, that's how it started, That's how they called him, the hot kid. And then I reminded him when he wrote the hot kid that they used to call you the hot kid, and so he thought, oh, that's a good title for the book. So, but yeah, like he always, you know, I think he just really always hung on to that essential being, that I mean, that the Jesuit, all these different things that all the experiences that he had in the Seabees, and because people would say, well, how do you talk? How do you know how, like, criminals talk? How do you know how, like, convicts talk? And did you do time? You remember some of that
Oh yeah,
stuff?
no, that's great. Yeah. I used to like to watch the XCB always clean up afterwards. After no matter what, he'd clean up everything. The CB in him never quite left him in
Oh,
that area.
he was a shopkeeper. It's funny you should say that, because you know how on Facebook they'll have 10 things you never knew about the making of The Godfather or something like that. And it sort of like 10 things you never knew about Elmore Leonard. One of them would be that he would always wash out the cans and bottles before
Oh, I
putting
know.
them in the trash.
No, I remember him in the dead of winter with big mittens on outside grilling and trying to hold on to a cigarette in those big cooking mittens, and somehow he managed it because he was even cool doing that.
And he wasn't like feeding pistachios to the chipmunks
The
outside.
squirrels,
I mean,
no, the squirrels, no, no.
squirrels,
I mean,
they
I
were
wish
they were
I should have
chubby.
taken. I wish our cell phones had come along sooner. I should have taken more pictures. I've got I've got another one that's not up right now because we're kind of moving around of Dutch and me at the Elmore Leonard tribute that weekend in Birmingham. Remember it was like a 3 day uh, Dutchapalooza that they held in Birmingham one year. Uh, and
Oh, the family?
no, no, I forget what the woman's name was. No, they had a big event.
Oh, I know, I know.
I lost over time the T-shirt with his image on the front. But
Uh-huh. Yeah, right.
let me just tell you this. I'll leave it this way. From the time I showed up to do that Esquire piece until the day you called me, and even through the funeral weekend, okay, I did not get cheated knowing this man. I didn't get cheated a single day.